Hello again. We're back with another YouTube live webinar. We hope you enjoyed our last one, which was, of course, with the Play CEO, Mr. Birger Johnson. If you missed it, it is available on replay. Please feel free to browse it on our channel. And of course, do check out our other videos, which I'm sure you'll find hugely entertaining. If you're watching live today, please feel free to join in the chat. Please keep it pleasant, and I can't promise to get to all of your comments, but I will attempt to respond to as many as possible. Today's webinar will be available for instant replay after it airs, so if you can't stay for the whole thing, please do pop back later. With us today, we've got one of the most interesting airlines, I think you'll agree, for 2022. Before I introduce you to the CEO of Bonza himself, please do enjoy our short video setting the scene. It's been a long time since Australia last had a brand new homegrown airline. Ambitious startup Bonza is keen to change all that. Backed by 777 partners, the weight behind Canada's Flair Airlines, and led by industry veteran Tim Jordan. Armed with a fleet of new and efficient Boeing 737 MAX, Bonza wants to shake up the market and make flying more affordable for all Australia. But Australian Impulse was some of the first, but as we know, Impulse was bought by Qantas, and Virgin transitioned to a more hybrid model after the demise of Ansett. Then we had Jetstar, which began life as a ULCC, but has since strayed from the blueprint. And Tiger Air, that struggled for years before giving up. What makes Jordan believe that Australia is ready for a new low-cost airline right now? Hot off the heels of a huge route announcement last month, Mr. Jordan has begun to show that he has a trick or two up his sleeve. Across the 25 routes planned to 16 destinations in this first route reveal, Bonza has identified swathes of East Australia that is unserved or underserved. In all, 80% of the routes in this announcement had no direct competition, and more than 90% lacked a low-cost option. And this is just the beginning. How far will Bonza go, both domestically and internationally? Will the 737 MAX be the only aircraft type it operates? And when exactly will its flights go on sale? We seek the answers to these and other questions in our webinar with the CEO of Bonza today. Well, I hope you enjoyed that brief video setting the scene for today's webinar. Now it's time to introduce you to the man himself, Mr. Tim Jordan, CEO of Bonza. Tim, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you very much.
I have to admit, it's not the easiest thing to organise a webinar between a CEO in Australia, a journalist based in the UK, with a PR agency based in LA. So we did manage it in the end. Tim, thanks for making the effort. So given everything that's happened over the past couple of years, some might say that you're quite brave to look at launching a new low-cost airline right now, but you've had lots of experience of founding airlines before. Can you just tell us a bit about your background?
Certainly. I guess I'm a low-cost diehard. I love what we do. I love the fact that we connect families, connect people and places that maybe haven't been connected before. And I've been lucky enough to have done that on several continents with several fantastic low-cost carriers. I guess prior to that with a network carrier in United Airlines. Career started back in the UK with Charter Airline, Novair. I then got involved with United Airlines, then went from United into some aviation consulting with PricewaterhouseCoopers. Then found my way to Australia with an airline called Virgin Blue at the time, which was pretty small, filling the void that was previously essentially Ansett. Helped them grow from about 15 aircraft up to nearly 50 aircraft. And then found my way to the Philippines with Cebu Pacific, helped transform them to be the low-cost carrier, very much as they are today, leading the Philippine market. Had a very short stint in India, which I won't dwell on. And then subsequently had the pleasure of leading the setup of FlyArystan in Kazakhstan, most recently as part of the Arystana group, which was a truly fantastic experience. And yeah, that brings us to Bonza.
That's great, Tim. Thank you. And what an incredible aviation pedigree you have. FlyArystan in particular has been an incredible success. Less than 3 years into its journey, the airline has really seen some incredible growth. I know they've now got 10 airplanes, and last year it carried almost as many passengers as its parent Air representing some 46% of the group's overall traffic. What lessons did you take forward from setting up FlyArystan that perhaps are guiding you on the roadmap to the launch of Bonza?
I guess the belief and understanding that demand can be stimulated and will be stimulated with the right pricing levels, no matter where you are in the world. And seeing the market stimulate very significantly, very successfully as part of the Airystana group in Kazakhstan, that was that was very rewarding to see. And the market, whilst the rest of the world was, continuing to struggle over the last 2 years, the Kazakh market, I believe, was growing at 30 or 40 or 50% above prior pandemic levels, primarily on the back of FlyArystan, and that was very pleasing to see. And I guess the key message being is, if you get the pricing right in terms of stimulating, rather than saying how high can we price it, if you actually say how low can we price it to actually get into the market and to stimulate the market, that's reminding yourself of the core fundamentals of what it is to be a low-cost carrier.
Very good points. Well made, Tim. But looking at Australia's history with low-cost carriers, they don't have the best track record for receiving these types of airlines down under. For example, we've got Virgin Blue and Impulse. They were some of the earliest, I know. But of course, Impulse was bought by Qantas. Virgin transitioned to a more hybrid model after Ansett went away. Then we had Jetstar that began life as a ULCC, but has really kind of strayed from that blueprint since. And of course, Tiger Air, which struggled for years before giving up. What makes you think Australia is ready for a low-cost carrier now?
I guess the fundamental numbers, when you look at, and indeed many people do cite the fact that Australia has been and always will be a two airline market, and I sort of go, yeah, well, if you look at the demographics of the country, if you look at 30 years ago when airlines like Impulse or Compass 1 and 2, etc., were around, the population has grown by 50%. So what may have been the case then is very different now in terms of just the sheer background numbers to that. Even when you look back just 21 years ago, when Virgin Blue was launched, the population has actually grown by a third.
Wow.
So there's fundamental changes in the demographics of the country which give us absolute confidence that the time is right. In terms of the other reference point there, in terms of Tiger, I will never malign previous operations. All of us struggle with different elements of our business at different times. It's a tough industry, we know that. But when you actually look at where they were flying, nearly 95% of their seat capacity was deployed on the top 20 trunk markets in the country. So it was a little bit like a Me Too type airline. Yeah. When we made our significant announcement last week of our initial route network, not one seat was actually deployed on the top 20 markets in the country. So that probably is the biggest, starkest difference between, if you like, the previous low-cost carrier operating in this market, which I have to say for nearly the last 7 or 8 years of its existence was actually part of a group environment. And that does make a significant difference in terms of where it's deployed. But the key fundamentals is that low-cost carrier was essentially a Me Too low-cost carrier flying on the top 20 trunk markets. We are certainly not going to be doing that. And last week's initial route announcement absolutely demonstrates that very much so. So hence, we have confidence because of demographic changes in the market, and the fact that we're not going to be a Me Too airline in here doing the same as some very, very good operators who already fly in this market.
Mm. You're absolutely right. That was indeed a very interesting route map, and I can't wait to talk to you about it in just a minute. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about your fleet. It's been around a year since CASA recertified the MAX, but apart from Fiji Airways, very few have ever actually arrived at any Australian airports. What made you choose the MAX as your core aircraft?
It was primarily our investment partner, 777 Partners. They are obviously a sophisticated aviation investor. They have their significant investment in Flair in Canada, and I guess the alignment in terms of what Flair is achieving and continues to achieve in Canada sort of overlapped with what we're looking to execute here, albeit slightly different in terms of the route network and focus there. But 777, if you like, had secured pandemic pricing for brand new aircraft. And now that is an outcome that when we were pulling together the business plan for Bonza, we didn't envisage that. We didn't think that we'd be able to come into the market as a new carrier with brand new aircraft, the youngest fleet in Australia from day one. Now, that's very, very powerful. And so to a large extent, that particular fleet choice was driven by our fantastic investment, our primary investor, our investor, 777 Partners.
That particular partner makes it rather difficult to write headlines on Simple Flying about these types of deals, because we've got 777 Partners and 737 Maxes and everyone gets rather confused, but that's beside the point. And it's interesting that you draw some parallels between yourselves and Flair, who are doing some incredible stuff at the moment. We'll come back to that maybe a little later, but you will be the first Australian airline to fly the Max, because I believe you'll take delivery, you'll just about pip Virgin Australia to the post with their Max 10s in 2023. Do you anticipate any pushback from passengers given the difficulty this aircraft has had with its public image?
Not to this point. There certainly hasn't been. There's all I can say is there is absolute enthusiasm for us to get into the market. Since our route announcements last week, one of the reasons we made them is because we've been inundated with hundreds of requests, thousands of requests of people saying, tell us where you will fly, tell us how you're going to change things for us. So we did. Literally the number of people who have flagged the aircraft type is, I can count on one hand the amount of feedback. So I think what's more powerful is the fact that we're going into the market with brand new aircraft, brand new, very incredibly fuel efficient, very sustainable aircraft. That is the more resounding message which has been heard in this marketplace. And as you say, virtually all regulators around the world have certified the aircraft for flying, and at this very minute hundreds of flights are being undertaken around the world. So it's really a non-event in this market.
And I think that's something we've heard from a lot of the operators that have brought the type back, is that passengers don't really care, or maybe they don't know which aircraft they're flying on. Those who know enough about planes to be able to identify the Max from maybe the NG probably know enough to know it's been gone over with a fine-tooth comb and is one of the most scrutinized aircraft in our skies right now. So I shouldn't think that would be an issue. But I know you signed for the Max 8, but can you clarify, are you also looking at the Max 8-200, the densified version that was produced for Ryanair?
The initial aircraft are the Max 8s, but then recently, back in December, 777 did place an order for the Max 8-200s, and if we earn the right to have those aircraft deployed in our direction, then we look forward to having those aircraft with us at a point in the future.
Great stuff. And this is the aircraft that Michael O'Leary refers to as the game changer. So I'm sure it will be a worthy addition if it does come your way eventually. But you said you want to launch services with a couple of MAX 8s in situ. But what is your ultimate fleet goal, and how rapidly are you anticipating scaling up?
In terms of scaling up, we announced recently that our intentions will be to grow up until, subject to regulatory approval and the regulator being happy with our progress, up to 8 aircraft in the first 12 months of operation. Ultimately, in terms of where we will grow to, the market will tell us. Let's not be an airline that says we will grow to X number. Because the market really tells us. Profitability will tell us. If we are successful at actually driving down our costs to such a point that we can take another $10 off the fares, then the market and the opportunity in terms of deployment of aircraft gets even larger. We're not coming at this as a predetermined number that we're going to get to, whatever the number is at a point in the future. That doesn't make logical sense to me in terms of being guided by the bottom line of the company.
Very good points. And of course, to maintain that very low cost baseline, fleet commonality is something low cost carriers very much focus on. It seems that you've already chosen which side of the fence you want to land on in terms of your narrow body jets. But do you see any benefit to looking at other aircraft in the future, perhaps something smaller to cater to these thinner routes?
I think it all, there's nothing out there at this point. The other thing you have to remember is, I guess once upon a time there was a bulk standard answer in the fact that, how big does a runway need to be for a mid-sized jet? And you go, well, it's 2,000 meters. Come what may, need 2,000 meters, build it. Now there are. There are a number of runways which are below that number, which may have some interest to us going forward in terms of some of the communities they serve. So we will look at, possible opportunities with existing aircraft, or perhaps, a long way down the line, you look at a different type of solution for that. But I guess we shouldn't. And the answer to some of these questions has changed over time because of technological advances, and that isn't going to go backwards. We're going to get better as an industry in terms of answering some of those questions. So the 2,000 meter answer is already gone. Let's see what answers we can get for potentially. And as I say, there's a number of airports and a number of centres that are currently have 1,700 meters. And if there's willing from some of those airports may have views to extending their runways. Some of those airports may not, but there may be other answers we can deploy in time.
Okay. That's great. I've now got these visions of eVTOLs scooting across the Australian outback, connecting these places with runways that are not suitable for 737s, but we'll see. Anyway, now we've come to the part that I know you really want to talk about, which is your big route announcement. And we were super excited to see the routes that you'd picked as your launch announcement. For those who didn't catch it, it's 25 routes connecting 16 airports, all in the east of Australia, with bases in Melbourne and the Sunshine Coast. What I found incredible was 80% of your routes have no direct competition. There must have been some serious number crunching going on to identify those, right?
Not really. It's the start. It is a first step. We and 777 aren't getting into this because we believe that the opportunity is what we announced last week. We believe there's a lot of opportunities out there. And predominantly it's on markets which are unserved or underserved. Underserved being, then there may be a business operator flying, multiple times a day without a low cost product. Now, clearly those markets would stimulate with a low cost fare, even on a very low frequency basis, 2, 3, 4 times a week. Our average frequency that was announced last week was a shade under 3 frequencies, I think, on each of the markets. I think 2.7, 2.8. The number of, and you're absolutely right, the number of unserved markets was 80%. So yeah, it really is what we're going to be doing. It's what a number of other carriers around the world are executing at the moment. We've been called in the last week, I guess we've been called transformational and a disruptor. But
Nice.
the one I actually like, which resonates most with me, is we're a common sense airline. There's so many markets in Australia whereby people do crazy things. No, not because they want to, but they're backtracking. They fly the wrong way to then fly back over their house 3 or 4 hours later, if they're lucky. Or they drive 200 kilometers or 150 kilometers down a highway to then fly back over their house 4 hours later. And that doesn't make sense for our industry. That doesn't make sense for aviation, tourism, anybody, let alone the poor customer being forced to do that. That is not how you make the most of this industry, by asking people to do illogical things forever going forward. So I actually like we're tagged as the common sense airline, and I think that resonates with me, because that's exactly what we announced last week. The Sunshine Coast base. For those of you not aware of where the Sunshine Coast is, it's it's a very significant growing destination north of Brisbane by about 100 kilometers. Now, if you want to fly north to North Queensland, as many Queenslanders do, you have to backtrack on a highway, the Bruce Highway, which is revolting, for want of a better term. And if you're lucky, it's an hour and a half drive. And if you're unlucky, it can be 2.5 to 3 hours if you happen to hit the wrong time of day. And then you're going to fly back over your house 3 to 4 hours later. And that doesn't make any sense at all.
No.
So, a lot of our route network that we've announced out of the Sunshine Coast is flying north. It's just common sense, and it's been missing. And there are a number of those situations in regional centres across Australia. You fly the wrong direction, or you fly the wrong direction to then fly the right direction on your second flight. And oh, by the way, that's cost you 5 hours. And very importantly, it's cost you $500 round trip if you're lucky. What we will be taking to the market is a fare of $100 or less, and it will be you'll be at your destination in an hour and a half. That's a very different proposition, and that's the common sense element.
Yes, makes a lot of sense. But your choice of the Sunshine Coast as a base for your airline, what was it that led you to that? My Australian journalist, for example, named a couple of other airports, Ballina Byron, Gold Coast, that could have been contenders. What made you pick Sunshine Coast as your base?
Yeah, it's when you're operating markets which are generally 1 to 2 hours in length, the airport cost component is so important. When you're flying 8 hours and you touch 2 airports, that's a very different proposition than if you're flying 1 to 2 hours. So our single largest cost in our business plan was airport costs. It wasn't jet fuel. It wasn't engineering. It wasn't even the aircraft cost of these brand new aircraft. It was airport costs. And we have to make sure that our business and our proposition to the market, which is low fares, we are able to deliver that. It's no good saying you're a low-cost airline and not delivering low fares. We know how that ends. So all of the airports that we announced last week, it was about those airports have been very proactive with us. They have come to us with proposals because they realize we are going to stimulate brand new market for them. The business travelers will continue to fly with the business airlines. We won't have a product that works for them, whether that's frequency, whether that's lounges, frequent flyer points. That's not us. those travelers who currently fly to and from those destinations will continue to fly with those incumbent airlines. What we are about is brand new market, stimulated off the couch, off the out of the car, and we can only stimulate that market with low costs. Those airports that we announced last week were those that were incredibly proactive and came to us with a pricing proposition which allowed us to offer super low fares going forward. And that's what we saw last week. There are a good number of other airports that were proactive, but weren't named last week. So those couple that you named, yeah, we absolutely had discussions with them. It's just, if you like, there were others from a route network perspective that lent themselves more readily to our initial announcements, and they were incredibly, other airports were incredibly proactive for us, with us. But there will be many, many others going forward, that is for sure.
Mm. So in terms of the routes that you have picked, the ones that have no competition, do you think that if they'd been a viable business proposition, even on a low cost basis, would they not have already been picked up by the incumbents?
It comes down to, I guess, the point just made in terms of, you know, if our cost base allows us to lower the prices to an extent never ever seen in those markets before, we stimulate a brand new market. And that allows us to be sustainable in those markets, whereas for other carriers it will not. And I guess the other, you know, the other overlay is, you know, if you're a business focused operator and it works for you to have a hub and spoke network, essentially, because you can offer 3 or 4 times a day service into and out of these locations, because it works for your network. Well, if all of a sudden they were deploying a non-stop service, well, that's going to be diluting their own hub and spoke network to a large degree, and largely, most likely, at a cost base that they can't afford.
Very good point. And, you know, as we're talking about the incumbents anyway, you know, we've seen how airlines like Qantas have reacted to expansion by other airlines like Rex. Do you see any pushback from the incumbents? Are you worried about them trying to outcompete you on those routes that you've identified?
I'm not sure. I guess that's a question better for the incumbent airlines. You know, as I say, we're about new market stimulation. So if it's new market stimulation and there is, you know, little to no erosion of existing traffic, you'd sort of question the logic behind that. And you know, at some point, you know, there was a very strong statement made yesterday by the competition authority chair here, you know, saying that they are watching very carefully in terms of competitor reaction. So you know, competition is great. Competition is a good thing, but I think it would have to be very logical. And as I say, it would. I think a lot of it would be somewhat illogical based on a hub and spoke operation of those existing carriers.
Thank you. So, although you are flying and you're focusing very much on unserved and underserved routes, there are 4 routes where you'll be going head to head with some other airlines. We've got Sunshine Coast to Melbourne, Newcastle, and as well as Melbourne to Mildura and Townsville to Toowoomba. I know you're looking at Qantas, Link, Rex, Qantas, Virgin, Jetstar, Pelican. So what is going to make passengers choose Bonza over the airlines that they're more familiar with? What are you doing on the passenger experience front?
I guess each of those individual markets have differing reasons for us going into them. You know, the most competitive market there is Melbourne to the Sunshine Coast. Now that is purely being operated from an aircraft rotation and cycling perspective for maintenance purposes. That's the only reason we're on that market. Other than that, we wouldn't be on that market because I think there's 3 existing operators.
Yes.
In terms of Mildura, the largest intrastate market within Victoria, and but with no low-cost service being offered. So there are two very good airline operators which are working to, I guess, capture the business market. But the entry point for flying on that market is close to $200 one way.
Yeah.
And that doesn't sit right for a large regional centre. So we will offer a low cost alternative on that market, the first time for many years that will be the case. So that's, I guess, the background to that particular market. In terms of Toowoomba Well Camp, I believe there's an existing arrangement with the owners of the airport, which underpins the existing operation there. I've got no visibility in terms of what happens in the future with that, but you know, we will predominantly compete. We're on a low frequency basis. We're flying twice a week. You know, I haven't looked at the specific days, but I'm crossing my fingers here that we're not actually operating on the same days. We may be, we may be not. I probably should have that knowledge at hand, but I don't.
That's cool.
But there's differing, so even for the 20% where we are actually coming up against, there's a differing reason for those small number of routes where we are actually offering an alternative in the market. And as I say, some of it is due to operational reasons, cycling of aircraft. Some of it is due to offering a underserved, we want to offer a low-cost component on that. Yeah. And that's really the key element for those remaining markets is there may be service there, but it's focused on business, or it's focused, it's not low cost. You know, it's not sub $100 fares. And we will come in and we will half the fare or better.
Fantastic stuff. And looking at your growth in the future, everything you've announced so far has been very kind of East Australia heavy. Are you looking at the rest of Australia? You know, what's your plan? How much do you want to grow that domestic network?
We think there's a lot of opportunity. The announcements last week related purely to 3 states, Queensland, Victoria, and New South Wales. It's the beginning, it's a first step, that's for sure. We will certainly embrace other states, all other states. However, the biggest impediment.
Gosh, I'm ever so sorry. We seem to have lost Tim. I know he is having some weather at the moment outside his property, so I guess the internet has gone down, but please bear with us just a moment while we get him back. And here he is, Tim, welcome back. Let's pick up where we left off. So you were telling me about how far you think your network can grow in the future in domestic Australia.
Indeed. The announcement last week covered 3 states, Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria. For sure, we're planning to get to the other states. You know, the opportunities don't just reside in those 3 eastern states that were nominated last week. There are many other opportunities across the country. The most important element to it, though, is getting the right airport costs. If we cannot go to the market with the right fare level, we cannot stimulate. You know, that calls into question the viability of the market stimulation model. And the really very encouraging thing is every one of the 16 airports that were announced last week, they get it. They see that we're bringing something very different to the market, a new proposition, if you like, the cherry on the cake for them in terms of new traffic demand, which is something they're desperate for. The tourism industry is clearly desperate for, and we, you know, it's one of those classic win-wins for them and their communities and the tourism industry on a wider basis. So Um, Airport costs are vital, and we are continuing to work through, I guess, that puzzle with remaining states, remaining cities. I would have to just call out Melbourne Airport for their proactivity in that regard. The route announcements last week, which had 8 routes for Melbourne. 7 of those are seeing low-cost routes or low-cost fares for the first time. So even in an incredibly mature market like Melbourne, we're bringing something very different to their route network. And of the 8 markets announced last week, 5 of them were completely unserved, which, for a very, very mature market and complex market like Melbourne is very, very significant in terms of the scale of new markets and underserved low-cost destinations that we bring to the market. I guess the one number which wasn't highlighted significantly last week, our announcement grew low-cost routes in Australia by 40%.
Wow, that's incredible.
So yeah, and that shows you how, if you like, how underdone the market is here in terms of low-cost fares. I will delve into history a little bit on this one. In 2010, number of low-cost markets in Australia was 58. In 2019, pre-pandemic, the number of low-cost operated routes in Australia was 58. No
That's
change.
almost unbelievable, isn't it?
It is when you look at what's happened in the rest of the world over that same decade-long period. Whereby, looking at, low-cost route growth, I think for ultra-low-cost carriers in North America over the same period, there was growth of 256%. So, yeah, absolutely. So, we're not suddenly saying there's going to be, 300 or 400 routes here, but there is significant pent-up growth and demand. And that's been seen by even capital city airports, such as Melbourne, who go, you know what, you do offer something very different to us. And hence, we can work with you as a partner. Let's work together to continue the recovery from this revolting pandemic. And so, yes, we do plan to get across the rest of the country, assuming airports in those locations can come to us and understand the point of difference that we can bring to their markets.
Interesting. And if you're going to be flying those kind of trans-Australia, those big routes, we've kind of talked about the smaller end of the market, but is there room for something a bit bigger in your fleet as well? Would you ever consider a wide body?
No, I think we will resist. We will resist like any low-cost carrier, unless it's driven by infrastructure or I think we will resist the temptation to deviate. That complexity thing that doesn't go away. That is a complexity that if we can avoid it, we should avoid it. If infrastructure or the size of the opportunity says you shouldn't avoid it, then by all means, yes, we'd sort of look at that type of deviation, if you like, from the model. I do remember, we put in place the ATRs very successfully at Cebu in the Philippines because infrastructure dictated that we could either ignore cities of 1 million people, or we could adopt the model to accommodate the associated market growth for those cities of 1 million plus people. And there were a good number of them, and hence the model deviation. Here in Australia, it's probably not to the same degree. And I think we can, especially when you're on a low frequency basis, the obvious opportunity is if something's working, you go from a couple of times a week to 3 times a week. But I don't suddenly see us flying, 3 times a day on a market. That's not our business model.
Understood. And of course, the MAX itself can go quite a long way. Very capable aircraft indeed. And I don't know if we'd call it your sister airline, but maybe your cousin that we spoke about earlier very briefly, Flair in Canada. Those guys started as a purely domestic operation, but have since expanded into the States. I think it was mid last year, and very recently began flying to Mexico as well. Do you ever see a reason to take Bonza international?
I think any of us would be foolish nowadays to say never. But there are no plans in the short, medium, or long term. There's just, yeah, again, comes back to the complexity side of things. There are just so many opportunities domestically that we see. Canada has double the seasonality of Australia. Yes, we have north-south flying in the winter, but obviously it's north-south flying within the country. So yeah. There is a requirement to do that, if you like, in that particular operating environment. The same need requirement doesn't exist here. Whilst we will say never, there are absolutely no plans to do so in the short, medium, or long term.
That's great, thank you. And the very final question I have for you, and I do appreciate so much you coming back on your iPhone to finish the interview when everything went wrong at your end. So thanks, Tim, for that. What is left to do? What is there still to be done before we can see Bonza tickets go on sale and planes start to fly?
We're making good progress, hand in hand with the regulator. The onus is on us to do the right thing. We've got to make sure that everything is as the regulator requires it. So good progress is being made in that regard. Assuming we continue with the same good progress to this point, we expect to be painting Australian skies purple from the middle of this year. Obviously subject to that, all of the approvals being forthcoming.
Love it. Well, best of luck with that. It sounds like you're a man with a plan, and it's one that Australia desperately needs. So yeah, best of luck, Tim. Thank you so much for coming on the webinar.
Absolute pleasure, and thank you for having me on.
Brilliant. I'm glad your power didn't go out and it was just your Wi-Fi, and I hope to speak to you again soon, Tim.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you.
Well, that's all we've got time for today. I hope you enjoyed our brief webinar, and please do tune into the next one. Keep an eye out on simpleflying.com for the information on when our next webinar will be and who will be our special guest. Do leave us a comment letting us know who you'd like to see on a future flying webinar. And as always, keep reading simpleflying.com. Do check out our other videos. Don't forget to tune in for our podcast. And thanks very much for being with us today.